Hi everyone and welcome to session 2. So last week we looked at what mental health and wellbeing actually mean, what it looks like to have positive mental health, but also being able to identify how you would notice a decline as well. You were introduced to the concept of mindfulness and encouraged to practice the skills in order to get the most out of this course. In today's session, we're going to start building our skills and techniques toolbox, and we're going to look at how you can manage your emotions by bringing in more of a balance of emotions. And we're also going to think about how you can manage distress through distraction, changing your emotions, and having more control over your thoughts. I'll put the learning outcomes for today's session on the screen now, so just take a moment to have a read through them so you know what to expect for today. So as I mentioned last week, each session is going to have the concept of managing emotions and managing distress running side by side. So this means that each session will have 1 or 2 skills on managing emotions and 1 or 2 skills on managing distress. So on today's session, we're going to start with managing emotions and we're going to look at building positive experiences. So if you were to weigh your life right now based on the emotions that you experience, my guess is that you would experience a lot more negative emotions than you would positive. So starting from today's session, it's about building in those positive experiences, building in those positive emotions so that you can have more of a balance, because negative emotions aren't necessarily a bad thing. We do need to experience sadness and anger and irritability. But it's also important that we're having positive emotions in there, like happiness and excitement. Doing things that you enjoy and being more active are parts of treatment that have been backed by research. So they've been shown to reduce symptoms of depression and low mood, even if you don't do anything else. Building positive experiences and having more positive emotions also reduces your emotional vulnerability. So if you think about when you feel really low, when you're not really doing much, when something really small goes wrong, it can feel like the world is coming to an end. It can feel like the absolute worst thing in the world. So actually, if you're building more positive experiences, feeling more positive generally, then you're going to be much more able to handle those little things that go wrong or those inconveniences that happen. So it sounds really simple to just increase the pleasant things in your life. But actually, if you're feeling depressed, anxious, or emotionally out of control, it can be really difficult to have the motivation to get up and go and do something that's enjoyable. When you're feeling depressed, the natural urge is just to lie in bed, to put the cover over your head and not really do anything, just ignore the world. And this is actually a survival response. So this is your brain's way of saying, hide away in the cave until it's safe. So this skill actually is more about actually doing it. It's not so much the activity and enjoying it, it's about having the motivation and being able to build the motivation to get up and do those things, almost doing the opposite of the urges of what your body is telling you to do. As I've mentioned, the way to bring in positive emotions is to build on positive experiences, to do the things that you enjoy in life. So how do you actually do this? The first step is to actually identify what it is that you enjoy, what brings you happiness and joy in life. So questions that you could ask yourself is, what is it that I currently enjoy in life? What would I like to do at the moment? What brings me happiness? You could also think about things that you used to enjoy that maybe you don't do anymore and that you'd like to incorporate back into your life. But also think about new things that you'd enjoy to do. Is there a new hobby or a skill that you'd like to develop? So I'd like you to take some time thinking about putting together a list of things that you enjoy, things that would be pleasant for you to do, things that bring happiness into your life. And these don't necessarily have to be hobbies or activities. These can be day-to-day things. It can be sitting with a cup of tea in your garden and enjoying just 5 minutes to yourself. So spend some time thinking about what it is that you enjoy in life and put together a list. The second step is to bring these pleasant experiences into your day-to-day life, or if some of them are already there, it's about increasing the occurrence of them. So it's important that you almost see them as like an appointment, like a doctor's appointment. So in the beginning, it might be that you have to actually schedule time for these, put them in your calendar, put them in your phone as a note, put a reminder on your phone to remind you to do it. And I'd say it's important to start by thinking about just one thing a day that you could do that you enjoy. So spend some time looking through your list, identifying what kind of things you could incorporate into day-to-day life, and then over the next week, try and schedule at least one of those things each day, and make sure that you do actually put them in your diaries or in your phones as a reminder to do them. So the important thing is that you schedule them, because at the moment it's not going to feel like second nature, it's not going to feel like a habit. You're going to have to force yourself to do them, you're going to have to make time to do them and actively push yourself to do them. The aim is that over time you don't need to do that and that these things come naturally, but just as a starting point to build that motivation, set a time out of your day to do something that you enjoy, and whether you're in the mood for it or not, make sure that you do it. The third step is where your mindfulness skills come in. So it's important that you're actually paying attention and focusing on whatever it is that you're doing. Fully engage in it and give your attention to it. Because if you're worrying about the future or ruminating about the past, then actually it's not going to be a pleasant experience. So it's important that while you're doing the activity, you're not sat there thinking about whether you deserve to do it, whether you should be enjoying it. Just throw yourself into the activity, be there, be present in the moment, and that's going to mean that you enjoy it much, much more, because otherwise you're just going through the motions and just doing it for the sake of it. So the third step is using your mindfulness skills and really, really being present in that experience. And the final step is to make sure that you're including other people in your activities. So it is important to make sure that we take some alone time and do things for ourselves or by ourselves and do things that we enjoy. But also we tend to find that when we're experiencing a lot of negative emotions, we isolate ourselves, we cut ourselves off from the people that we love, our friends and our family. So go back to your list and make sure that there's things in there that include other people, whether it's friends, family, work colleagues, people that you're on a course with, just to make sure that you're building relationships as well as positive experiences. So that's your first skill in managing emotions, and it's all about building in those positive emotions so that there's more of a balance between those positive and negative feelings. You do that through building positive experiences and things that you enjoy and that bring you happiness. And obviously these are all focused around the short term. So next session we're going to focus on how you can build those positive emotions and positive experiences in the longer term too. Next, we're going to move on to how you can manage distress by looking at things like distraction, changing your emotions, and controlling your thoughts. In the information sheet that I provided around managing distress last week, you'll have seen that these skills aren't about making you feel any better. These skills aren't about improving the situation or changing the situation. These skills are about making sure that you respond in a way that doesn't make the situation worse. They're about being able to just ride out those bad experiences that you can't control or can't change. So it's all about just tolerating and managing distress in those situations. So I thought it might be useful to think about some of those coping strategies or responses or reactions that can sometimes make the situation worse or just make you feel worse. So what I want you to do is spend some time thinking about coping strategies or reactions to negative situations that you're aware of that might make the situation worse, that might ruin relationships, that might have a negative impact on your physical health, that might have a negative impact on your mental health and well-being. So spend some time thinking about that and drop me some suggestions on the Padlet and Facebook. Now that you've thought about some of the unhelpful responses or the responses that can have a negative impact on the situation, I'm now going to introduce you to some positive coping strategies or some positive ways to respond to a situation that's just going to help you ride out that distress, help you manage that distress in the situation when you can't change or control anything. So one way to remember the skills I'm going to introduce you to is that the wise person accepts. So we're going to go through each of the letters and introduce you to an individual skill. So the A in accept stands for activities, and this is about using an activity to essentially distract yourself from the situation. So it's about distracting yourself from the distressing situation, distracting yourself from the negative emotions that you might be experiencing, distracting yourself from all the thoughts that might be going through your head as a result. And engaging in an activity also helps you to feel a little bit more in control. So activities might include things like watching TV, listening to music, doing some kind of activity or hobby, doing some puzzles, ringing a friend and having a chat. But for distraction to be effective, I've got 3 key guidelines for you to follow. The first one is that you should be actively engaged in it, so it should be something that completely has your attention and focus. Our brains can't focus on 2 things at once, so if you can get your brain focused on an activity, then it's going to be impossible for you to be thinking or worrying about the situation that you're in. So thinking about TV, it's about making sure that you're watching something that you're actually interested in, something that is going to have your attention, like documentaries or a film that's got a really good storyline and you really want to follow it. The second guidance for effective distraction is to make sure that it's enjoyable. So your distraction technique shouldn't feel like a chore. It should be something that you actually enjoy doing. And finally, make sure that you've got activities that are realistic to the situation. So for example, if you're at home, there's going to be different activities that you could do when you're out in the community. So it might be useful to think about different activities that you can use for distractions for different situations and scenarios, and make sure that you're prepared for them as well. So for example, if you're going out and about and you know that music is a good distraction for you, make sure that you've got your headphones for you. The key is really planning for these distraction techniques. The first C in accept stands for contributing, and this essentially means just doing something nice for somebody else. So what we tend to find is that when we do a good deed or when we contribute to somebody else, it not only makes them feel good, but it also improves our mood as well. So this is very similar to balancing our emotions. So when we're feeling really, really distressed, contributing or doing something nice for somebody else can just make us feel a little bit better and help us just ride out that distress and manage the distress. So this could include, leaving a note for somebody, calling up a friend and checking how they are. It doesn't have to be big surprises or big gifts. It's just doing that little something nice for somebody else, even if it's holding a door for somebody, just to make you feel a little bit better in that situation. The second C in accept stands for comparisons, and this is about comparing yourself to other people who might be less fortunate, or if that feels difficult, comparing to yourself in worse situations. This skill is about building, the bigger picture, seeing things from a different perspective. Because often when we're distressed, we tend to feel that we're the only person in the world that's experiencing that or have gone through that. It can feel like the worst thing in the world. But actually, if we look at the bigger picture, there are people who are going through much worse, experiencing much worse than us. So this doesn't always feel helpful to compare ourselves to other people. So if that feels like it might be too tough, it's about comparing yourself to yourself. So thinking about situations where that situation might have been worse, thinking about times where you might have felt worse. So it's about thinking, yes, I feel bad at the moment, but actually I've felt much worse than this, or I've been in a much worse situation than this. This skill doesn't work for everybody, but it's an important one to keep in mind. The E in accept stands for emotions, and this is about creating different emotions. So if you're distressed, you're most likely to be experiencing some form of negative emotion, whether that's sadness, anger, anxiety. So the aim of this skill is to almost flip that and create the complete opposite emotion, whether that's happiness, relaxation, calm. So this can involve things like listening to upbeat music, watching something funny, getting in contact with somebody who cheers you up or relaxes you. But it's all about creating just the opposite emotion to what you're experiencing, and the aim is to create a positive emotion of some kind. Most people, when they're feeling low or depressed or anxious, tend to try and validate themselves by listening to sad music or by watching sad movies. And this is important too. It's important to feel validated. But for the purpose of distraction, for the purpose of tolerating distress and managing distress, this skill is about just creating those positive emotions and almost creating the opposite emotion of what you're currently experiencing. The P in accept stands for pushing away, and this is about just pushing away the difficult situation, thoughts or feelings just in the short term so that you can go about your day-to-day life. So this is really important if a distressing situation comes up when you're supposed to be doing something else. So as an example, if I was at work and then I had a telephone call that was some sad news about something, I've still got to function at work, I've still got to focus my attention. So I might use this skill to just push those thoughts aside, push those worries and those negative feelings aside just for the short term while I go about my day to day, and then later I can focus on them and come to terms with them and feel a little bit more in control of them. There's lots of ways that you can do this. One is a very visual activity, so almost kind of, putting your thoughts into a box and then putting them on the shelf. You could put them on a conveyor belt and just watch them go away. And then there's some more practical tools that you can use. So I've got some really cool ways of pushing thoughts aside that I use that I find really effective, but also quite fun as well. So the first one is a worry jar. So this is about having a jar or even a box that you can write down your worries and put them in. So in a distressing situation, you would write down what's going on for you, how you're feeling, what you're thinking, and just pop them in the worry jar so that you can just carry on doing what you're doing and then come back to it later. So this is my little worry jar. So what I do is write down any worries or negative emotions or thoughts that I'm having, and I just pop them in my little jar, and then later on in the day I will come back to them, review them, see if they still feel important, because sometimes we're so distressed in the situation that we don't realise that in the long term it doesn't really have a big impact. But it also just means that I can, see what I can take control of, see what I can manage, and just take control of the situation if I can. But this just allows me to put my thoughts to one side and go about my day-to-day life. Obviously this is quite a small little jar because I keep this quite handy, but you could use a normal jam jar, you could use a box of some kind, like a shoe box, decorate it in some way. My other little tool is my worry monster. So this is my worry monster. He's quite big, but you can get mini ones of these. So he has a little zip in his mouth, and the idea is similar to the worry jar, that you write down your worries, write down your feelings, and just pop him in the worry monster, and it's almost like he eats them and takes them away. But ultimately, if those worries are still there, if it's something that you need to focus on, then you can just come back to them later and again just look at whether they still feel important, whether there's anything that you can control or change about that situation, and it almost just allows you to give time to your worries. The T in accept stands for thoughts, and it's about replacing your thoughts. So similar to the way that distraction works, our minds can't focus on two things at once. So if we're distressed and we're finding that our thoughts are quite distressing, or they're worrying, or they're anxious, then it's about replacing those thoughts with more positive ones. So it might be that you use positive affirmations, or replacing those thoughts with just some kind of activity or distraction. So things like doing a puzzle, reading, anything like that, that's just going to replace your thoughts with things that aren't about the distressing situation, that aren't anxious thoughts, is going to work. And finally, the S in accept stands for sensations, and this is about intensifying your sensations. So what we tend to find is that when we're distressed, we can feel really, really overwhelmed in our bodies. Our heart's pounding, we feel really tense, we just feel really physically aroused. So intensifying our sensations is about giving our mind something else to focus on, essentially. It's about focusing on another part of the body instead. So this might involve things like having a really cold drink, listening to really loud music, having a hot or cold shower, using things like a stress toy or stress ball. It can even include things like, cuddling or stroking something soft like a pet or a cuddly toy. It's about really just intensifying your sensations to give you something to focus on. This skill also includes harm reduction techniques, and this is really significant for people who engage in self-harm behaviours or self-injury, or even just have urges to harm themselves in some way. So to use this skill for that method, you might put something like an elastic band on your wrist, and when you get those urges when you're distressed, you can pull it up and flick it. It causes pain but no damage to the body. Another technique is to hold an ice cube in your hand, which feels really, really uncomfortable, and in a lot of situations can feel quite painful as well. But again, it just doesn't cause any damage to the body, so it can be really, really useful in overcoming some of these self-harm behaviours or even just urges. So that's the end of our first bandaging distress technique for your toolbox. Again, I just want to remind you that these skills are all about just managing and riding out that distress. Not many of them will actually make you feel any better, but actually, if you're able to respond to a distressing situation without making the situation worse, without damaging any relationships, without making yourself feel worse, then these skills have been effective even if you don't feel any better afterwards. I've put up an information sheet on the Padlet and Facebook that just outlines all of these and also provides some examples, just so that you can have a look through and see what might work for you. Because ultimately, not everything in this list is going to be effective for you. You're not going to enjoy all of them or find them helpful. So it's about giving them a practice, seeing what works for you in different situations as well. And it might be that you almost have to put a couple of them together in some really distressing situations so that you can, really ride it out over a longer period of time. So in today's session, we've looked at how you can manage your emotions by building more positive emotions through positive experiences in the short term. We've looked at how you can manage distress by using the idea of the wise person accepts, and this is about using things like distraction, changing your emotions, or having more control over your thoughts. So in our next session, we're going to look at building positive experiences for the longer term. We're going to look at how you can build more confidence or feel more in control of your life. And then we're going to look at managing distress by using your senses and focusing on the 6 senses to self-soothe. I want to thank you for attending today, and I hope you found the information useful. There's some information on the Padlet and Facebook to support you in practicing the skills, but like I said in the first session, the really key thing is to practice these, to go away and try and integrate them in your day-to-day life. So spend some time over the next week looking at your lists, looking at the activities, looking at the skills, and try and practice them as much as you can over the next week. Thank you for coming. I look forward to seeing you next week.